Today on episode 69, of Rail Talk, we talked to Lisa Lazarus and Ben Mosier from HISA. They answer tough questions about contamination, the ADMC program, and what the sport looks like going forward. I'm Joe Bianca. I'm an ownership advisor at West Point Thoroughbreds. Don't forget to subscribe to the show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Hit that button. We're up over 14,000 subscribers now. So we're just on a rocket ship to the moon. And I want to give a shout out to one of our original subscribers, the homie, Skip Anderson, sending me this dope shirt, NDSU EWE. Get it, John?
I see what you did there, Joe. I like it. And you put it on a shirt, too, so all of us can understand it better. Thank you for explaining that. Jonathan Green, General Manager of DJ Stable. Joe, this is an exciting show. We're busting myths and taking names.
Real Talk is sponsored by Facing Tipton. Record-setting year for Facing Tipton in all aspects of the auction industry, from the Night of the Stars to the New York Bred sale to the Saratoga Select sale to obviously the digital sales. They've been just kicking ass left and right. And I just love that they're going to, on Breeders' Cup Day, the Saturday at least, they had horses that are going to be champions win the Classic at $2.3 million purchase in Sierra Leone, and then a $40,000 purchase in Torpedo Anna win the Distaff, who's going to be Horse of the Year most likely. It just goes to show that no matter what your budget or what your level of the market is, you can find some nice horses at Facing, and it's because they do so many different sales. On that note, they released last week the sale dates for the 2025 Facing Tipton digital sales, which you've heard me wax poetic about and how you need to get involved, get some nice horses to run back quickly. There's going to be one,
Joe. There's going to be this many.
10?
10. There's going to be 10. There's going to be 10 digital
cool.
sales.
Yeah, I was counting. I was trying to do the math. I was like, is this one every month? Not quite every month, but 10 out of the 12 months, there will be a digital sale. There are also going to be flash sales throughout the year, which John is a veteran of when they sold Mensa. And the first digital sale of the year will be January 16th through the 21st. They're all going to be in that 6-day range. So plenty of opportunities to get in and get bidding and to nominate. Obviously John and Len have done a great job utilizing that platform that, listen, when you buy a lot of horses, you got to sell a lot of horses because there's only a certain amount of stall space and certain amount of expenses that you're willing to put up at a certain time. So it's a great place to find turnkey horses, but also to make room for new inventory and move the horse on to another trainer who, maybe not on the same level as the big wigs like John and Len, but can have a lot of success in this business. And that's what I was saying earlier, that Facing Tipton does it at all levels, all strata of the business, where you can find a nice horse no matter what your budget is. So, relatively quiet week on the racetrack, but we mentioned it, we previewed it before at the end of last week's show. The Claiming Crown was Saturday at Churchill Downs. Really excited day of racing, and the main event of the day, the $225,000 Jewel, ended in a disqualification that awarded Laughing Boy the victory. Now, I didn't watch this race live. Usually, I can tell how bad of a controversial of a call it is by going on horse racing Twitter. And if there's only 50 people saying it's the worst DQ they've ever seen, then it wasn't that bad. But if it's 1,000 people, then you're like, oh man, I got to check this out. But I only saw a few dozen, because every DQ is the worst DQ anyone's ever seen on horse racing Twitter. I love this event. It was so cool to see those horses galloping past the Twin Spires. Churchill sounds like they're lobbying to have it there full time. I hope it still bounces around a lot. It was at Churchill in 2022. It was at Fairgrounds last year. I got to give a shout out, and this is something I rarely ever do, to the HBPA, because they were one of the driving forces behind this event. And I just thought it was great. There was a great story in the Blood Horse about it, about how the owners of these claiming horses got to go to the champagne room at Churchill Downs and have these major celebrations that are usually just reserved for the upper crust of the blue-blooded of the racing industry when they win grade ones at Churchill Downs. So I love that. I just think it's such a cool event and so needed to recognize that, not every horse has value. You don't have to be a grade one winner or a stallion. Every horse has value just in general, but also value to the sport. And I love to see that. There's some big 2-year-old racing over the weekend, some big performances as we try to start to spin it forward to Derby 151 that I want to mention. But John, I'll toss it to you on the Claiming Crown.
Joe, I think the Claiming Crown checked every box that it intended to do. They had large fields for the most part. I think the average number of starters in each race was like 10 or 11 horses. There were a couple with 12, one or two with 9, but for the most part, it was right in that sweet spot, which from a gambling standpoint is exactly what all the racetracks have been saying. The more entries that are in there, the more likely it is that people are going to bet and wager and have different combinations, and therefore that should benefit the overall pool and the overall amount of purses down the road. So I thought that was huge. Number 2 is 6 of the winners came from other racetracks. Delaware, Indianapolis, Gulfstream Park, Santa Anita, Keeneland, and Colonial were all represented by horses that won their respective races. So again, bring me your tired, you're hungry, your claimers that want to run in starter allowances for a shit ton of money. And that's what they did. So I thought that was really great. And the other thing, Joe, is that, and again, you as a handicapper more so than me, listen to the odds of the winners of each race: 14-1, 4-1, 2-1, 5-2, 30-1, 13-1, 11-1, and 12-1. Sounds to me like there were a lot of horses that were coming in and winning these races that at least from a betting standpoint, they weren't the favorites for the most part. So again, it really added to the intrigue, and I think it spoke to the competition level at these races. And they were very difficult to handicap, which again is great for racing. It's what you want to see. Nobody wants to see chalk every race. I mean, if you get chalk you get a favorite that wins every third race. That's the statistics. That's what you want. But Joe, I think that it did all those things. And then, as you mentioned, I listened to a couple of interviews from trainers that were running at Churchill Downs for the first time, owners that had never walked through the gates and never even, seen that racetrack live, the Twin Spires live there before. It was, the pinnacle of their careers at that moment. And I think that's really important for us to remember, is that, these horses are coming in, they're claiming horses. It's the meat and potatoes of racing. It's what we need to make most races go. We only talk on this show primarily about the black type races and the ones that are movers and shakers in the industry. But for this time of year, this is the absolute perfect set of circumstances and types of races to have to reward people that make these races go on a Wednesday and Thursday and even late races on a Sunday. You have to reward them somehow. And I think this gives everyone an opportunity to have a chance to be in the winner's circle at Churchill Downs.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it was just, it's so cool. Like when you read the story, and shout out to Sean Collins, who did the Blood Horse story. He said multiple trainers describe their wins as the biggest yet in their career.
Yeah.
That's worth something. And one of them was Juan Cano, who he claimed West Point stalwart Voodoo Zip. Right. Voodoo Zip, who had raced in the West Point colors until he was 6 years old, was claimed for $50,000 last year. Right. Won at 33-1 in the Canterbury Tom Metzen Memorial. Like that was just so cool to witness. And he said, I waited too much for this race. When I looked at the nominations, I thought I had a good chance. It made me so happy. This is the biggest win of my career. Hopefully there's more coming. And this is, I love that. And there was, one thing I love about West Point Partners is they are very, especially on a horse like Voodoo Zip that ran for so long, they're very interested in what happens after the horse gets claimed from us. And he had some like so-so results. So it was just so cool to be able to text those guys and girls and be like, yo, look at your boy Zip went in at 33-1 in the claiming crowd. And they were all really thrilled about it. So that was a great result. A few other notable results from the weekend I want to mention. Big-time 2-year-old performances as we slowly will start to turn the page and look towards Derby 151. We're less than six months away from the first Saturday in May. Guns Loaded is a horse I wanted to mention. He was in a very, very salty-looking maiden race on Saturday at Churchill Downs. And I know because we had Castle Run in that race, and we think pretty highly of him, and he was really no match. This is a horse who debuted well bet at Saratoga, ran second to another really, really nice horse, and he was absolutely dominant, went right up to the front and kept on cruising. And this is a race where I think the second horse, the horse who ran second, Camp Hale, is also a monster. This is for Ian Wilkes, horse who ran a big, big second at 22-1 first time out. You never see Ian Wilkes horses run like that first time out. Stepped up again, ran another huge second, was like a million lengths clear of third. So I would keep an eye out on the top two from that Saturday race at Churchill, Guns Loaded and Camp Hale. And then this is a horse that I have a tiny bit of a rooting interest in, the Bob Hope Stakes on Sunday at Del Mar, Bullard. West Point owns a small percentage of Bullard. He's by Gun Runner, another Gun Runner monster. Got to rally into a really fast pace, but crushed him. Run by like 4 3/4 lengths. And if you watch the race, like he was running and then he had to stop a little bit, and he didn't get like checked or anything, but he made several runs in that race, kicked away. Looks like he's only going to go further and further. And Beto Rispoli was like patting him on the neck before he even crossed the wire. That's another horse that I think you have to be on the lookout for, and I think is only going to get better as he stretches out. Safi Joseph had a pair of rising stars over the weekend. Rojo Rita won by 16 1/4 lengths. She's a filly, potentially maybe a Kentucky Oaks horse. Another horse, Grayscale, who cruised. He was spit to 3-10 first time out. I'll believe it when I see it. When I see a Safi Joseph horse who's working 44-4 for a half mile, makes it to the first Saturday in May, let alone wins on the first Saturday in May. But John, I thought it was, in a weekend where we had the blue collar success stories, we got a little bit of a glimpse of the future as well.
No question. And if you look historically, Joe, at the winners of the Kentucky Derby, they usually race and or break their maiden in October, November. You don't see a lot of horses that are winning in June and then running 11 months later in the Run for the Roses. They just don't hold up. It's too hard to be a really good horse sprinting and then elongate that to 1.25 miles, in the first weekend of May. So this
Don't tell Sandman that.
It happens. It does happen. It just doesn't happen that often.
Right.
But you're right. And certainly, when you're looking for horses to bet for, really any of the Triple Crown races, it's horses that are competing now, that are running in October, November, take a little bit of a break, usually because of the holidays or because there just aren't races setting up for them, as far as points races coming up. And then, they really start hitting the throttle again in January, February, and we go into these $1 million, grade ones that I know Tink is always very upset about, that there's 2-year-old grade ones before the Kentucky Derby. That's a whole nother show that we can talk about. But this is when you see it. So, mark your words, Joe Bianca, that you may be onto something as far as finding some of these horses that are winning, and winning impressively around Thanksgiving, because they do have a tendency to show up big when it comes to the Kentucky Derby preps.
Yeah, this is the runway right here. This is like the start of the runway to the Derby, and it's always an exciting time. So, yeah, a couple of horses from this past weekend, I'd be on the lookout for maybe potential Derby future wagers if you can get a price. Real Talk is sponsored by TaylorMade. TaylorMade was by far the leading consignor. This is from my buddy John Green. I'm not that smart. John is feeding me this info. By far the leading consignor at the Keeneland November sale by like over 30%, he says, from the next leading consignor, and that's no surprise. TaylorMade is as good as it gets at all of these sales. Yearlings, weanlings, broodmares, horses of racing age, any kind of nice horse that you got, they'll make them look the absolute best for you on sales day, and obviously in the pre-sale prep as well. I mean, there's a reason they've been doing this for as long as they have, and there's a reason they top the consignor list at pretty much every major sale. They're the gold standard in this business, in the sales ring. But also beyond the sales ring, we talked about the Stallions, the Stallion roster. It looks better and better all the time. Like I said, the Instagrams are starting to really run. Not this time. Obviously speaks for himself. Tacitus, Dr. Scheibel, early voting. A lot of really nice horses with some really, really strong pedigrees that you can get in on the ground floor right here before they inevitably blow up. Maybe not to the tune of not this time, but there's a lot of opportunities to buy low right now on the TaylorMade Stallion roster, just because, they're new stallions. You have to introduce them to the market at like a reasonable price. And they do a great job of that, making them accessible. And once those horses start getting on the track, you're not going to get that same deal. So you are making those breeding decisions for 2025. You get some new mares from the Keeneland November sale. Jump on a TaylorMade website and peruse that Stallion roster. I promise you're going to find some good value. So we're so thrilled to bring these next guests to the Rail Talk studio. Returning champion, the CEO of HISA, Lisa Lazarus, and the executive director of HIWU, Ben Mosier. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. We're excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. It's obviously a busy time always in the world of HISA as we try to organize and civilize things on the race in the world of racing. But one of the reasons that Lisa wanted to come on was we had Michelle Yu on a couple of weeks ago, and we had a long discussion, some parts about HISA. I think a lot of it focused on the idea of provisional suspensions, because we asked her about the development that HISA had decided to lift a lot of provisional suspensions retroactively and also change the criteria for which provisional suspensions are levied. So I want to play this clip. This is clip 1, Nathan, that when Michelle and I were talking about provisional suspensions, and she mentioned kind of the delay sometimes in getting split samples back.
I'm very happy that they are going to lift some of these that, would fall into the category. But also, I think all the provisional suspension is crazy. Now, I feel like we do need a little bit more of an accelerated program, because right now there's guys that got bad tests in the beginning of summer and we haven't even heard anything about it that we know are floating around out there. So does it need to be 6-7 months down the road? No, but can you figure this out and get the split sample back and get it done within 30 days? Sure.
Yeah, I mean, so that's something I definitely want to follow up on, because, provisional suspension makes sense if the process is expedited and quick and able to come to a verdict. I have heard these concerns or complaints that some of the split samples or the confirmations are coming back slower. How do you respond to what Michelle said? We'll start with you, Lisa.
Yeah, can I just start by, I think I want to just back it up a little bit, if that's okay, because I think one of the things that was missing from the conversation is an understanding of where the provisional suspension concept comes from and what it's intended to do, right? And I think this gets lost on a lot of people. First of all, I'm not sure if it was clear, so I want to make it clear here that it's only ever applied to what we call banned substances, which are the doping substances, the substances that, according to our program, should never be in a horse's system. So they've never, ever been applied in therapeutic overages, which is obviously the vast majority of the positive tests that we receive, right? Now, the reason why they're used, and they're also used in horse sport, like the FEI, the International Federation of for Horse Sport, uses them as well. And really what it is it's a tool to protect all of the competitors, in our situation, trainers, who are competing cleanly. So what the hypothesis is we find a trainer who has one horse that has a steroid or clenbuterol or EPO. The risk is that their other horses have the same. And we don't want to, we feel like the greater good is to protect you, John, your horses or West Point's horses that are lining up in the gate beside that trainer's horses, of the risk that they could possibly also have those substances in their system. And as we all know, winning a race, I mean, there's such minute margins of victory. Often it's by a nose, or you're really trying to figure out who won. And obviously, anything that's performance enhancing could make a difference. And so the perspective from most trainers is, oh my God, that could happen to me. And I appreciate that. There's obviously a lot of empathy. But it's important to understand that the only reason it was ever put into place was because the vast majority of trainers are competing fairly or doing the right thing, and they shouldn't have to compete against trainers that aren't. And we all know with service and all that, it's very hard to put the toothpaste back in the tube. We can make maybe the other trainer, whole through fine repayment and purse repayment, but the gambling public never gets a do-over there. And so that's the point. So I think the reason why we changed, and I'm going to pass over to Ben, is that we recognized that we were actually doing a pretty good job with the expeditious review and culmination and closure of these cases. And so it wasn't really necessary. We still believe it's necessary in the case of trainers who have more than one horse with the same substance, and also where a barn search turns up the same banned or doping substance that the trainer's horse tested positive for, then you have a much higher degree of evidentiary certainty. And in those cases, we want to protect the clean trainers. So I'll pass to Ben to talk more about the timelines.
Yeah, thanks, Lisa. On average, both banned and with controlled medications, we're seeing cases solved or resolved, I guess, within 75 days on average. And that includes from the collection of the sample through B analysis and full arbitration. So, like it or not, I think the provisional suspension was helping push those along at times. But I do think the rest of the process is still in place, where even with kind of moving back on the imposition of these provisional suspensions, hopefully we still see those averages carry on. with how long these are taking. We do have a number of cases that go on through additional appeals. And so, yes, are there still pending cases out there from even in 2023? Sure. But those have gone through appeals processes all the way through the FTC and maybe even into federal court. So those would be why those cases would still be considered pending. But when we're talking about just, arbitration up into the what's called the internal adjudication panel or the arbitral body, those are moving very quickly, definitely much faster than in the old state systems.
And one thing I want to just point out, because it may not be clear, and this might be what Michelle was referring to, is that because of provisional suspensions, you hear about the banned substance cases resolving much more quickly, right? Because it gets publicized. Obviously, everyone knows the trainer's provisionally suspended, and so it's out there in the public forum. And ultimately, also, it's important to know that every trainer gets credit for that time served against their final suspension. And to date, under HISA and HIWU, there hasn't been any trainer who's served longer than as a provisional suspension what the arbitrator ultimately ordered. So nobody ever served any time that they shouldn't have in the end. But the thing that I think maybe Michelle is focused on is the therapeutic overages of controlled medications. We don't make those public until they're much further along in the process, because the fact that it's a therapeutic and it's not as serious, and that need to notify the public isn't as important. So those really don't get publicized until the final decision. And so that's why it may seem like there's more time that has passed. It's just really about what the rules say about public disclosure.
John, before you ask about contamination, I just have a quick follow up on that. Because I think some of the disconnect is it's not like other sports where if you suspend an athlete, well, they just sit on the sidelines and do nothing. With horses, you're in charge of the care of 30, 40, 50, who knows, however many horses. So it's not easy to unwind that operation so quickly, especially if you're going to be able to jump back in if the case goes in your favor and start training again. So can we just also clarify for the public, what happens to the trainers' horses when they are provisionally suspended?
So I'll give maybe a sort of a broader view, and then Ben can give a more technical answer. But essentially, if they want the horses to have published workouts or run in races, they have to transfer those horses to another trainer. However, if they don't want to do that and they just want to wait it out, because also they can get a provisional suspension hearing very quickly. Provisional hearings are available within a few days, within a week. They can still take care of their horses. They're still allowed to care for their horses, still allowed to be on the backside. They just can't have them race or work in the trainer's name.
Any horses that were entered into a race prior to the official serving of the provisional suspension could still race as long as they were injured before that. So, but after that, they are allowed to continue to care for their horses on the backside while, like Lisa said, we've had trainers request a provisional suspension hearing. And it's just a hearing with one arbitrator to hear the details of that particular case and try to decide in a hurry if that provisional suspension is warranted. Meaning, is there a risk to the integrity of competition with this person and the positive test, right? And so we've had multiple of those happen, and they can happen very very quickly within 48 hours. Sometimes they may want a week to put together their defense and talk to the arbitrator. So and we've had a couple overturned, by the way. So they go both ways.
So from the time that a sample is taken until the time you guys see the lab result, whether it's let's use a split sample. Let's say it come back positive, and then a split sample is tested. What's the time frame on that?
Yeah, so let's take a step back. So we mandate all laboratories to report test results to us, positive or negative, within 10 business days after the receipt of that sample to the laboratory. And we're shipping samples essentially every 48 hours or more, depending on if it's a weekend or a holiday. You know, those types of things have to be considered. But 10 business days, most negatives are reported within 5 to 7. Positives require an additional step called confirmation testing. So that can take up to 10 business days, depending on the substance. At that moment in time, all the results flow through HIWU and my results team. We take a very comprehensive look at every adverse analytical finding that comes through our door before we report anything to a trainer. So that includes scientific review. It includes a review of the chain of custody to make sure that all of our responsibilities are upheld. We also look at lab packs and things like that. Once we serve a notice to a trainer, they have essentially 7 days from that day to request a B sample or a split sample analysis. Okay. At that, we will then go out and request other labs' availability to conduct the B sample analysis, get the sample shipped from one lab to another. You know, the lab that did the A sample does not do the B sample. And then we're on average about 15 to 20 days from the time that the B sample arrives at the new laboratory. So if you add all that together, right, of sample being reported to HIWU plus 7 days to request the B plus additional shipping time, we're looking at about 30 days by the time a B sample reports back. And so that, you know, that's happening, I think, relatively quickly. When I hear horror stories of prior jurisdictions, I know that it was taking upwards of 60, 90 days sometimes to get just split samples back. So we've really expedited that process, I feel like.
Okay. So it's not, because that's a common misconception, I think, amongst trainers, is that, you know, that they're kind of hanging in the balance for months at a time. But it sounds like, you know, just through the way that you guys have explained it, that it's not months. If anything, it's weeks, and that's only because you're asking for an additional sample in the case of a positive finding, which is very important. And then the other, I think, huge misconception out there has to deal with contamination, and whether or not it's, you know, I just got a bunch of feed and all my horses, you know, came up positive because there's a potential feed contamination, or, you know, this one van driver that continually urinates all over the place, except in the bathrooms on the backstretch. And actually, we shouldn't be joking about it, I'm sorry, but it seems like that, you know, there's a major concern that the trainers have, and especially in barns that don't have closed, don't have any kind of cameras or anything like that, where somebody is going to come in and urinate in their horse's stall. The horse is somehow going to ingest, you know, the hay that the guy or woman, you know, urinated on, and therefore come up positive for some issue, usually some kind of human medication. Michelle asked the question, but it's not just Michelle that I think has this concern. It's a lot of trainers. So let's play the clip, and then if you guys could respond to that, we'd appreciate it.
You're having a whole string of horses test positive for something. To me, that is most likely contamination. So in that instance, where it would be contamination, then all of a sudden you are still being provisionally suspended immediately, right? I was unloading horses and the driver of the van got off and went into a stall and was peeing in the stall. And I ran over to him. I was like, hey, what are you doing? You can't pee in my stalls. And he told me, mind your own business. I'm like, you don't understand. This is my business. Like, you're peeing in my horse's stall. And we had like an altercation. We are literally in a barn with 2 bathrooms also. So I was really pissed. And so I told our grooms, like, don't put a horse in there. I closed off the stall, and it came back that the other guy who we generally deal with when we're shipping told me that guy is a diabetic. He is on metformin. They're actually really good friends. So I made a complaint to the van company. You know, that is something that if I wasn't standing right there, we would not have known. A 2-year-old was slated to go into that stall. So what happens? That 2-year-old ran at Del Mar and he got tested positive for metformin. A, we would have been suspended. And B, we would have had no idea where it came from. And then we would have tested all of our grooms and none of them would have come back for it. Right. So then we would have been really screwed.
So there's a number of things, misconceptions and things that Michelle just frankly got wrong, that I think it's important to explain and clarify. So first, one of the rules and programs that is honestly sort of revolutionary under HISA and HIWU that never existed under the prior state system is what we call our atypical finding policy. So in the case of contaminated feed, we have 27 substances that fall under this atypical finding policy. And they actually include any substance that's ever been found in contaminated feed. So your scopolamines, your ractopamines, your synephrines, you name it, those are all on this list, along with substances that a horse can produce endogenously, like testosterone, for example, okay? If a horse tests positive for any of those, the trainer gets a notice saying, your horse had an atypical finding. Can you let us know, what feed you're using, what bedding you're using, et cetera? And in these cases, HIWU really takes on the burden of investigating and working with the trainer to get to the bottom to figure out what happened in that situation. Once that process is complete, and as long as HIWU feels like it's more likely than not that it was contamination, not only do you never get suspended, they never even get a violation. They don't even there's no disqualification even. So to suggest that, if you have a whole string with contaminated feed, that would be a time when there would obviously be contamination, and so there shouldn't be any suspensions. My point is we've never even notified someone of a violation. We've never accused them of a violation for a contaminated feed, let alone suspended. So that's just not true. And it's important to know we've had 44 atypical findings, and only 4 have actually been notified as cases and gone through the regular process. And all 4 of those were medications or therapeutics, I should say. They weren't banned substances. So they never would have been provisional suspensions anyways. So we go to such great pains to make sure that when a trainer is notified of a positive test, notified of a violation, that it isn't contaminated feed or contaminated bedding. And I think part of the reason why we don't get maybe credit or recognition of this program is that one of the benefits is we never make it public. So, so don't necessarily we talk about the program, but we don't actually say Trainer Bob had an atypical finding for ractopamine and it went away, because that's the whole point, is you shouldn't have, any sort of public disclosure if it really wasn't your fault. Nothing you could have done to prevent that from happening. And I also want to give the testosterone example a little bit more context. We've had a bunch of those. And what's been interesting about those is very often it's just that in the stud book, they're listed as a gelding, but they're really a colt or a stallion. So we're like, okay, that's fine, because obviously testosterone level will be higher, and then that gets corrected. We've even had some mares who have had tumors that were producing testosterone endogenously that really shouldn't have been, and then ultimately had to have veterinary care. So what happens is that our science team, our HIWU science team, talks with that trainer's veterinarian, and they figure out what's going on. So it's actually really providing a service to the industry. So it is a complete myth and misnomer to suggest that a horse would be really suspended for contaminated feed. It has never happened, and it will never happen. I want to also talk about the urination in the barn, and then I'm sure Ben wants to add something. So first of all, the metformin example isn't a good example because, as everyone should know, we've actually stayed all of the metformin cases. So we are currently not suspending or even putting a case in motion for a metformin positive. We do notify the trainer that it tested positive, but then we basically put it on ice. And that's because we're doing a number of administrative studies at University of California, Davis. They have a herd there that actually Ben and I were out there last week visiting. Really impressive facility. And what's great about their herd is that they keep those horses in racing shape so that their metabolism and essentially their musculature is very similar to racehorses. So they stay fit. We saw the horse run on the treadmill, etc. So the administrative study is actually going to help us understand whether or not it's really plausible for someone urinating in a stall to cause a positive test. We're not sure that it is plausible scientifically, but that's what we're trying to figure out. We want to know. We're also figuring out whether or not touching metformin and touching a horse or putting in, putting your hand in the horse's mouth, putting the bit in whatever, whether or not that could cause a positive test. Again, we don't think it's scientifically plausible, but we're doing the administrative test actually, or the administrative study to see whether or not it's plausible. So, both of those cases are really being addressed. And there are also a number of different rule modifications we've made around human drugs of abuse to treat them differently, to account for possible inadvertent transfer. And I think those have really, been successful and achieved what we set out for them to do. I don't know if you want to add anything.
Yeah, I would add a few things. So with the metformin study, very, very happy that UC Davis agreed to take on this study. But just a reminder, that is being completely independently done by the RNTC and their scientific advisory committee, which, arguably there's no other group of science-minded experts in this industry. If Lisa and I wanted to go set up our own scientific committee, we wouldn't be able to do so because they all belong to this group already. So there's a huge value in what the RNTC and that group brings here. And they agreed to take this on before they even asked Davis to do the administration study. They reviewed all the scientific literature they could on the substance, not just in horses, but in humans as well, because what they're trying to understand is how the substance metabolizes through a human body, if it is urinated into a stall, and then can a horse actually pick that up and be detectable, right? So they needed to try to understand everything they could about it before they wrote the studies for UC Davis to take on. So as Lisa said, very impressed by what UC Davis is doing out there with their herd and what they're hopefully going to report back. But they're going to report their findings back to the scientific advisory committee to then recommend to us on how they believe we should be regulating the substance. And what that means is there a certain level that it should be called positive at the end of the day based on potential contamination, right? And so, we're anxious to understand what it is they find, but we also want them to get it right. And so, we're giving them all the time we can to do this. And as Lisa said, all the cases are currently pending. We do notify the trainer they can go ahead and get the B sample tested if they want to. If we change how this is regulated, all those funds will be returned to those individuals. And, just happy to hopefully get it right. Thankfully we haven't had a metformin positive actually since the summer months. So, either way, things are happening out there, I think, to either better control potential contamination, or if it is being used, that's being stopped. So,
right. And so much so, guys, that I noticed that I think today you announced that all the Breeders' Cup entries and runners have come back with clean tests, and therefore those monies are going to be the purse monies are going to start to be distributed as well.
Yeah, I mean, I love hearing that you're doing the study on contamination, because me, as a person who doesn't know the equine anatomy and is not a scientist, I have no idea when people claim contamination, whether it's bullshit, like whether it's a complete fabrication and excuse, whether it's a legit cause for these positive tests, or whether it's somewhere in the middle. Like, I'm so glad that we're hopefully going to get like a kind of final answer to that question. And I think that's going to be great for the sport moving forward. I think this is a good place to take a break. We're going to come back and we're going to talk a lot about the developments that HISA has been announcing in the last several weeks, several months since the last time we talked, Lisa. So we'll be right back after this break. Rail Talk is sponsored by the Green Group, the #1 accounting firm in the horse business. Len and the Green family have over 200 horses. DJ Stables won over 2,500 races. We got to get a counter going, John, because I feel like you guys have won so many races since we started saying over 2,500. We need to know exactly where you're at. Let's get our crack editing team on that. Green Group's got almost 1,000 clients in the horse business. They make the money, save them taxes, and as always, there's a special exclusive offer for listeners of Rail Talk. Call Len up at this number. Michael, give it to us.
732-634-5100. Green Group 732.
That's right. Or go to greenco.com. There's a complimentary, confidential half-hour consultation in it for you where Len guarantees you'll get value, but you don't have to take it from me. Take it from friend of the show and another satisfied customer of the Green Group, Joe Orsino.
Oh, my taxes, 35 years plus. I originally started training for them and then moved everything to them like 6 months later. Absolute best. I mean, it's just when you know they're overlooking your taxes, it's in their hands. They when I first started with them, my old accountant had made a terrible error, and I talked to Len about it, and he said, back then, 35 years ago, let us handle this. You handle your horses and your training. You worry about that. That's what you do. Let us do this. And you know what? And that's the relationship I've had with them since. I let them handle everything, and you don't have to worry at night. I think you get a total package of knowing that, you know, if there's so many write-offs that we don't know about as horse trainers and horsemen, things that we do that you don't think about, that like I could, you know, write that off. That, well, it's part of your business, and they know every part of your business that they're supposed to know, and they have all the I's dotted and the T's crossed, and you know, it takes a lot less worry out of the day when you can just do what you do best and let them do what they do best.
All right, back with Lisa and Ben here. You put out a really interesting press release recently, Lisa, and I think that's one of the things that you guys do a great job of is communication, and that's been something where the industry has been lacking for a long time, and also unification. This story of you and Drew Fleming, the CEO of the Breeders' Cup, sitting down with some of the leading executives across the sports industry, leaders from the NFL, NHL, NWSL, UFC, U.S. Soccer Federation, U.S. Equestrian Federation, to talk about some of the work you're doing and the progress that you've made. First of all, how did that happen? Like, well, how did you get all these people to come sit down with you? And then secondly, what were some of the top line takeaways from that meeting?
So first of all, we got them to come talk to us because, you know, I worked at the NFL for 10 years. A number of us have been in different roles. You know, Ben, Drug Free Sport International, has, you know, contact with basically all of the major league sports. And so we really reached out and we said, we'd love to invite you to the Breeders' Cup. And we'd love to sit down and have a conversation, you know, on Friday. And it's going to be sort of off the record to start, you know, we'll sort of see where it goes. And these are things we want to talk about, like how do you deal with the social license question? How do you deal with, you know, concussions? Like what's your protocol? You know, sort of the whole gamut. And it was actually also interesting because we had a mix of medical doctors and executives. We had some medical doctors as well who are league doctors. And it was really just a great conversation. It was really organic. We had Lindsay Zarniak moderating it. So she was prepared with a lot of, you know, like she normally is, enthusiastic with a lot of great questions. And it just really flowed. And then we learned, I think the biggest takeaway for me, which was something I had a gut feeling about anyways, but kind of really confirmed it for me, is you only get the public's trust about safety when you talk about it, you know, when you actually address it. I think there are a lot of actors in horse racing, but also in other sports that think, if we just like put that in a corner and we put it in a black box and we pretend it's not there, like no one's going to worry about it. And, you know, Jeff Miller from the NFL did a fantastic job of talking about, you know, what the NFL's been through and how they've really tried to do that head on, you know, is to try to really talk about safety, you know, address concussions, like show the helmets and all the changes that have been made. Share, like they've made a lot of changes to the playing rules, you know, to protect their athletes against head injury. So that was a really big, you know, takeaway for me, is like, don't be scared to talk about it. You got to talk about it. Now, I do think that when we get to a point in horse racing where we're really not talking about it for the right reasons, that'll also be kind of modicum of success, because it'll be an assumption that it's just there. But avoiding these more difficult topics never make them go away, and you lose trust, I think. So.
Yeah. No, definitely. And that's why I think the quarterly statistics are really important to put out there and publicize. And yeah, it's something that's been I've lamented a little bit. Like, back when they were having all those breakdowns in Southern California in particular, that was blaring headlines all across the country. And California's done a really, really good job
really have.
reducing those numbers. And
They
it's like barely been reported on. It's like page 18C, maybe a
it's
short blurb.
only news when it's, when it's bad.
Yeah.
One of the things I'd like to just add to that is, we are working incredibly hard at HISA like every day to reduce the risk of horses getting injured and certainly fatalities. And we're definitely making headway. There's a lot more to go and a lot more to do, but we're making really marked progress. And I just want to remind the public, and I guess remind your listeners, that that is because of all of the ingredients that we put into creating that, right? Sort of baking the cake. And one of those key ingredients is the anti-doping program and a recognition, I think, by the industry that we're serious about it. And they have to not just be serious about, not cheating or not trying to get an advantage. I think that's really a small minority of trainers, but to just be really careful about what their horses come in contact with, right? And I really believe that that heightened professionalism, that care is one of the important ingredients that's helping us to reduce injury. Like, for example, you talk about methamphetamine. Do we think methamphetamine gets into a horse intentionally by trainers? Almost probably not. I doubt it. We don't know for sure, but we certainly doubt it. But, we don't know. Maybe horses being exposed to meth is just really bad for them, right? You wouldn't want your kids exposed to meth. So, the enhanced scrutiny and care that we're all putting into avoiding that, I do think is an ingredient. And so when people complain again about how strict the anti-doping program is, for example, they've got to recognize that there's like an equilibrium there. And I believe we still have to do some work to get to that perfect point where it's the right amount of fairness with the right amount of rigor to get the ultimate, results. And that's what we're still kind of experimenting with, the different ingredients. But you can't say, I don't want a difficult anti-doping program and assume you're going to get the same results on the safety side. It's all linked together in my view.
Right. No, I think that's a very good point. The only thing I would correct you on, Lisa, is that when my kids were in high school, if I could have gotten them to go 6 furlongs in a minute 10 on meth, I probably would have, encouraged it. I don't know if I would have administered it, but I would have encouraged it at the very least.
There are exceptions to every rule.
There are exceptions to every rule, and certainly, for as a parent, you do things, for your kids, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Ben, I want to talk a little bit about the process of of having the labs in place. And now there's not only a different number of labs that you guys work through, but some of the players have changed. Some of the chairs have been shuffled. We don't have to go into which ones are in, which ones are out. But as far as the process goes, how are you guys vetting out the labs, and how has it gone so far?
It's a pretty comprehensive question. But if I can, I'll back up a little bit to talk about it in the beginning. A lot of our decision making in the beginning is reliant on the act itself, on the HISA Act. We were mandated to utilize RNTC accredited laboratories, and so at the time that I took this job and we started talking to labs, there were 9 RNTC accredited laboratories throughout the U.S. Okay, so we started having initial conversations with those labs, and so we're not mandated to absolutely work with each one. There has to be a negotiation. But ultimately, it's a kind of a dual decision where a state racing commission can decide that they want to continue utilizing their in-state laboratory if they choose to do so, and if HISA and HIWU can come to terms from a business sense, a contractual sense with that lab. Okay, so through the conversations, we went from 9 down to 6 contracted labs at that time. After that, also mandated in the rules, but there was a allowance for a transition and an extended period of time. So we are mandated to manage our own accreditation process. It's called HEAL, and it stands for Horse Racing Equine Analytical Laboratory Accreditation. Okay, it's the Series 6000 in the rules. This accreditation model is modeled after the World Anti-Doping Agency accreditation model, which manages all human anti-doping initiatives worldwide. And so this model has been proven to work. And currently there's about 30 laboratories accredited worldwide under the WADA code. Okay, so we have been working extensively with the RMTC on a transition period to get these labs in a position to be able to approve for HIWU accreditation. And that is coming soon in January of 2025. So we're about a month away to start our own accreditation process. There's a lot of similarities from the RMTC to the HIWU process. But one of the most important aspects that we had to work on in the past year or so was what's called the External Quality Assurance Program, the EQAP program. And so these are a series of different test samples that are sent out to the labs to essentially check their abilities and their performance. Before HIWU, before HIWU and HISA, the RMTC was doing some external quality samples, but not to the extent that HIWU is. What they were doing is what's called single blind samples. So single blind samples are when we have an outside vendor that essentially spikes a sample with typically a common medication. Could be a spiked blood or a urine sample, and it's wrapped up in a box and it's shipped to the lab, and it says right on it, this is a test sample, right? The labs will readily admit that when they see a test sample, they're throwing all their resources at this test sample to make sure that it's done properly, okay? The RMTC was doing that twice a year before HISA and HIWU. We have now started doing that twice a month with both single blinds and double blinds. And so a double blind sample is when we actually have a spike sample or a real sample that's pulled from a horse that had been administered a certain level of a medication or substance. And it looks just like any other sample. Could be a post-race. It's actually packaged and it's put together with an electronic chain of custody in the test barn. So we actually send these to test barns and to vets to ship to the labs. And when they open that box, it's with 30, 50, 90 other samples collected over the course of the last couple of days. And it's just going through routine analysis. That's happening now twice a month as well. And that had never been done before to this extent with the double blind samples. So when you see what's going on with some of the labs, I'm not going to talk about specific ones necessarily, but they are definitely being challenged in a way that they never have. And that is part of our quest for harmonization with these laboratories to ensure that they can test for all the substances they claim they can, that they are adequately staffed and taking the appropriate amount of time to look at these samples, to make sure that no matter what approved methodology or machines each individual lab may be using, because they're not required to use the same machines all the time. That would be impossible to try to get everyone to use the same machine and be on the same routine maintenance and on and on and on. But, there's many different methodologies that can end with the same result. Are they getting that same result, though, is what we're trying to figure out. And that's our quest here.
Right.
In the human anti-doping world, they've been doing this since the early 2000s, and they're still striving for harmonization in a lot of ways. Right. Because there's always new substances. There's always novel substances. There's always new technology that means we may be able to dive deeper and test the substances that everybody wants us to pick up at the lowest levels, right? We talk about picograms and things like that all the time. Well, John, you would want me to test for picograms for a substance like EPO, right?
Right.
No doubt.
Yeah.
You want me to try to get as low as we can on certain substances. So that's what we're trying to do here. And then the third quality assurance sample is called the past sample exchange. So essentially we will notify a lab like industrial and say, hey, we want you to pull these 20 negative samples that you've already called negative out of your freezer and ship them to the Pennsylvania lab. And we're going to have the Pennsylvania lab reanalyze them to make sure that nothing was missed in those negative samples. Now, it's not double jeopardy for the trainer who has those samples. It's just a an investigative analysis. But, that was not being done as comprehensively as well. So that's the process that we're moving towards here in January. And it's, the other thing I would say is that now the labs are required to work together. Lisa, famously said, as I like to say, and when we talked about the UK lab in our press conference, that these labs in a lot of ways were working in silos. And so, they had multiple clients to report to with different bracing commissions. And now with HIWU, with HISA, they all report to one client for all these samples being tested. And we can actually compare the information and ask the labs to work together. We have weekly lab calls where they all get on a call and we talk about what we're seeing on a weekly basis. And that's never happened before.
Yeah.
And that standardization and that communication and cooperation is huge.
And it's so important.
Yeah, I think that's one of the biggest game changers in terms of HISA and HIWU, because these labs, the underperforming labs, can't hide anymore. You got to show your work.
Exactly.
You got to show your work to your peers. You got to sit in those lab meetings. You've got to, you got to be at the same level. And the industry has never tested the labs in this way. And that's why you see many falling away, because not many, a couple falling away because they're not able to meet those standards. And it's best for the industry to get down to a small number of labs that are consistent, that are harmonized, and that we can all trust.
Right.
Yeah. Like the fewer variables we have in the process, the better. Right. Last question from me. This was another great press release that you guys sent out that I think is really important. It's called Horse Insight. So it's a new tool for veterinarians that has like a holistic view of the horse's career and medical history so they can make better decisions. It has workouts and races and medications. And this makes me think of New York Thunder, who broke down last year in the H. Allen Jerkins on Travers Day. Now, he passed the vet. He ran in that race, presumably was sound. But if you go back and look at his medical history, all the injections he had, all the times he was scratched, all the disparity in terms of workouts, like how far apart they were, to me, that was a horse who was screaming that he was unsound. So I think that this kind of thing is huge to be able to have, like the press release says, have a more holistic view from the veterinarian side or whether or not this horse is sound enough to run. What do you envision this having? What kind of impact do you envision this having on the industry? And then B, just very simply, how can we make sure that regulatory vets can access it?
So to start with, one of the things that has been really important for HISA from the get-go is that we're not just making rules and like sound people, but we're actually trying to give information, back to the industry. And that given all of the data requirements we place now on veterinarians and trainers, we want them to benefit from the fact that they're putting their time in to give us that data, right? And so I think you're absolutely right that now what the regulatory vets can access is essentially the horse's last few years, right? And one kind of snapshot, and they can print it and look at it and analyze it. And it just enhances the information that is quickly at their fingertips considerably. Because as you're right, regulatory vets, they have to examine the horse on the day. But if they have no idea or they're not able to look in that moment at what's happened in the last couple of months, it's much more difficult to make an informed decision. And so we think this is a tool that is really going to help them. Like, they're all really excited about it. We have, within HISA's database, we have different security groups. So if you are registered as a reg vet, which is always, double checked and verified, and the reg vets are, our veterinary team, Dr. Jennifer Durenberger, Dr. Sherry Silverman, Dr. Karen Hassan, they work directly with those vets all the time. Then you can access it, and we know that they are accessing it. At least the ones, we still have a few that are a little bit older that are not really a little scared of a computer, but the ones that aren't are accessing it. And it's just one of the things that we've found when you get outside of New York and Kentucky and California, there's really a shortage of reg vets, right?
Yeah.
And we want to empower the reg vets to be able to credibly and efficiently examine as many horses as possible pre-race. I mean, there are some jurisdictions that didn't even have pre-race exams before HISA, you know? So, you might have a regulatory vet that has to look at 200 horses on the backside, in a single day. So the more we can give them to expedite that process and make it easier and give it, the chance to have a higher quality, we're going to keep doing that. So I think there's a lot more to come in that respect.
And is this something that they can access on the HISA website, on the portal? Like, how do they get to it?
The reg vets access it on the portal.
Okay.
They also can access it like from their phone, but they have to go into the portal, go to the website. So yeah, and they're on the portal a lot because they have a lot of obligations to us, including reporting injuries, fatalities, entering records, whatever it is.
Yeah, no, I mean, all that data collection can be a pain sometimes, but we're looking for revelatory information that can keep horses safe. So it's another, I think, potential game changer that you guys are introducing.
I hope so. Time will tell, but we're really excited about it, and we're pretty optimistic that it'll have a big impact.
Same here. Well, Lisa and Ben, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for the time. Thank you for answering the tough questions. You guys are very accessible. Lisa, you've done a great job answering criticism. So if anybody has anything in the comments that they want us to ask Lisa or Ben, please write in, and I'm sure that she'll get back to you. So thanks for the time, guys.
All right. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
All right, so that's going to do it for episode 69, the sexiest episode yet of Rail Talk. Thank you to Lisa Lazarus and Ben Mosier for stopping by to talk about some of the developments with HISA and to answer some questions from their constituents and from the horsemen. And if you do want to get involved and be on the Horsemen's Advisory Group, you should apply. Shoot them an email at horsemensadvisory@hisaus.org. We'll put that at the bottom of the screen for those watching it on video, indicating your interest and your qualifications by Thursday, December 12th, 2024. Get in the game. If you got complaints and you got criticism, they're okay with that, but you got to be part of the conversation, and they're inviting you to do that. John's on that committee, and they definitely do a lot of good work, and any kind of positive change that you're seeing, you are going to be part of it. You're going to be the impetus behind that. Why would you not want to be the impetus behind positive change in this game? So thanks to Lisa and Ben for coming through. Thank you to our producer, Patty Wolf, our associate producer, Nathan Wilkinson, and Julia Agresta, who is back home tomorrow, but Nathan's been carrying the load for us these last few weeks, so appreciate you, my brother. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you next week back here on Rail Talk.